Hi, I'm your friendly neighborhood cottage witch Chickadee, and today we're going to start talking about what witchcraft is. This is going to end up being a three-part series. We're going to start today with the history of witchcraft, and then we're going to move on to modern witchcraft, and then finish it all up with an actual definition as well as my own definition and experiences as a witch. So to start talking about what witchcraft is, I think it's most important to start at the beginning. Start at the history of witchcraft. And most of us start by thinking about the witch trials, both in Europe and in the New World, or in the States or Canada. But it clearly goes further back than that. We were using magic long before that. That was just history's first, hysteria over witchcraft. The main importance, other than just knowing where witches come from, for talking about history, is also to set the groundwork for talking about modern witchcraft and the symbology around that and what it's become. Before I get ahead of myself, let's talk about what the first witches were. So history.com said it best. Early witches were people who practiced witchcraft using magic spells or calling upon spirits for help or to bring about change. In this sense, most were simply natural healers, or so-called wise women, which were women whose jobs it was to, be a midwife. Unfortunately, this position ended up being misunderstood later on, and that's what we're going to get into. But basically, these people were just elders. They knew how herbs worked, and they had a tie to the spirituality of their community. They were healers, faith leaders, and storytellers. They're like the people who passed on through oral tradition the legends of their people, as well as knowing the flora and fauna around where they live. They know what herbs are for healing, which ones are the opposite, and basically they were just there to keep their people safe. The first recorded witch is from the Bible. The Witch of Endor is consulted by King Saul. He's asking her to bring about the spirit of the prophet Samuel in order to gain advice against the Philistines. He went to the witch when repeated askings of God didn't play out for him. Originally, King Saul had banished all witches, conjurers, sorcerers, and the like from his lands, but in the end, he sought the help of one. Of course, the story goes that Samuel gave him news that he wasn't going to do well against the Philistines anyways, so whether or not this had a positive impact on witchcraft, I kind of doubt. And since we're talking about the Bible, we also know that there's a phrase in there that condemns witches as well. And that phrase is, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." And of course, because everything about the Bible is about the way you read it and the way you interpret it, we could interpret this in a different way too, but we're not going to delve too far into Christianity in this video, beyond the witch trials, which we're going to get into right now. So as I said, obviously that ended up being a bit of a negative experience with the witches anyways, and from here we don't see positivity towards witches, and unfortunately this seems to go hand in hand with a lack of positivity towards women in general. Most, if not all of us, have heard of the witch hunts, whether that be the witch hunts in Europe, in Salem, or somewhere else, or maybe you've heard of all of them. But even before that, there was prejudice against single women, and this kind of just piled on top of the prejudice against witches. The true hysteria began in the mid-1400s with the publication of the Malleus Maleficarum. The Malleus Maleficarum, or the Hammer of the Witch, was a book written by Heinrich Kramer, and it was a book used to identify, hunt, and interrogate, torture witches. For more than a century, it was the best-selling book, beat only by the Bible. Within this 160 years, it's estimated that upwards of 80,000 people were put to death for being witches. A fun fact I heard on TikTok, so I'm not sure of the validity of the statement, is that the Malleus Maleficarum made its way to Russia, and instead of jumping on the bandwagon, they dismissed the book. And I found that really interesting, that all of Europe seemed to jump on the bandwagon and be like, grab your torch and pitchforks, go find the witches and burn them, But another place, sharing a border with those countries was like, what the heck? Anyways, I just thought that was an interesting thing to bring up. 80% of these witches were women thought to be diddling the devil. So who were the people who were most often accused of being witches? It was women. That's not to say that there weren't men who were executed for witchcraft as well, but it is definitely a majority of women, both in Europe and later on. And more specifically, it was women who were on the outside of society in some way, shape, or form. So these are single women, widowed women, women who own their own land, have their own money. They can support themselves. They don't go to church often enough. They socialize too often with other women. They were healers or midwives. Basically anything that could be seen as competition to the men around them was seen as a quality of being a witch. And how are these women identified as being witches? Well, while there were many other ways to be identified, the main one was finding a blemish on their body. And this blemish could be almost anything. It could be a scar, a beauty mark, a mole, an extra nipple. Of course, that one was extra bad because that was very clearly a witch's teat. And if you don't know what that is the area in which a witch's familiar was thought to suckle from them. Yeah, we can talk about familiars and witches' teats another time. That's a topic all of its own. But yeah, basically somebody would accuse you of being a witch in one way, shape, or form, and then you would be brought in, interrogated, tortured, and a lot of the times, whether or not you confessed, you were, put on trial and burned at the stake or hung, depending on where you were. So now we move on from Europe, across the pond to the New World. While there were witch trials across the country, the one everyone thinks of and the largest that happened in the States happened in Salem, Massachusetts. It's often known simply as the Salem witch trials. I do want to do a separate video on the Salem witch trials because I think it deserves its own video. But just in case you don't know what happened in Salem, Massachusetts, I do have a quick little blurb about it. In 1692 to 93, around 200 people were accused of witchcraft. Somewhere between 140 and 160 of them were actually arrested and put to trial for witchcraft. While in jail, 4 of them died before they even reached trial, and in the end, 20 people were executed. 19 of them hung and 1 of them pressed. But yeah, that's pretty much the skinny of it. That's the history of witchcraft. It's a history of oppression of women, and unfortunately that oppression continues, and we'll talk about that in modern witchcraft because it's no longer just women at that point. And because of that, of course, oppression leads to empowerment eventually, hopefully, and that will be the topic of modern witchcraft, as well as like a couple other things that we need to touch on before we jump into what witchcraft actually is and a definition for witchcraft and magic. In addition to this, during my research, I decided that there were a couple of different actual stories that I'd like to do like a spotlight on, if you will. So there was one from New France, which is present-day Quebec. So that one's a little closer to home. And in addition to that, while it's close to home, it's also actually about a man who is accused of witchcraft. And I think it's important to talk about how men were also prosecuted for witchcraft, despite the fact that we usually talk about women, just because that was the majority of people who were accused. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something, and I hope you'll stick around to learn some more. And if you have something to teach me, I love to learn. So if you or someone in your family knows a little bit more about the history of witchcraft, like be it maybe you have relatives who were a part of the Salem witch trials, or maybe there was a witch trial near you where you live that you'd like me to either do a little bit of research on or just let me know about. I'd really appreciate that, and I'd love to get that conversation going down in the comments. And of course, this is YouTube. You know what to do. I don't need to tell you what it is. But in addition to YouTube, you can also catch me over on Twitch. The link will be in the description, as well as I have a blog you can check out, a couple other socials. Everything will be down below. I'd really like to be able to interact with you in person, or not in person. I'd really like to be able to interact with you live. So if you want to join the conversation over on Twitch, you can find my schedule there. And if you want to keep the conversation going somewhere else, we also have a Discord. I would love to build a community with you over there. Whether you're a witch or not, you're welcome. Thanks for listening. Bye.